everyone. My name is Jake, and I'm so privileged to lead this community that we have here called Aldea. And we are a community that really is united and bound together by common values rather than common beliefs or doctrine or dogma. And one of those values that we really hold very highly to is that of gratitude. And as you can see, for all that gratitude really provides for us, how it shifts our experience in life. And last week, as we started this new series, The Frequency of Gratitude, we talked about how gratitude can really be a perspective shift that changes what we see. It changes how we perceive our world, and then naturally affects how we feel, how we interact with others. But it's not always so easy. How many of us get annoyed or frustrated when someone just says, hey, just do this and it'll all be okay. Oh, you're having a hard time? Just be grateful. Just be grateful. How many of you have heard something like this, especially recently? Are you feeling tired? Are you feeling exhausted? Just take an ice bath, okay? And then it'll solve all your problems. Your body loves it. I'm like, my body does not love it, okay? Are you feeling stressed? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Meditate in an ice bath, okay? It's like, stop, swipe, next video, So this whole mentality, we'll just do this and it'll all be okay. That can be kind of frustrating and annoying. And the truth is, when we look at our natural and real experience of being human, there are some barriers that we experience to actually living in a state of gratitude. And I know that these are barriers that I experience. So I want to come together and talk about these and maybe entertain some ideas about how we can reframe these challenges. You might be someone who says, I want to be grateful, but I don't necessarily have the easiest time expressing myself and expressing gratitude. If you can give me some easy steps, sure, but on my own, I don't even know what it means to be grateful. Like, how many of us have sat at a Thanksgiving table at one point or another, and you're eating your meal, and you think you're all the way through, and then someone stops and says, let's go around and share what we're grateful for. And you're like, I almost made it this whole meal without having to give a speech, just trying to eat my cranberries in peace. Or maybe you're someone who would say, how can I be grateful and at the same time hold the reality that everything in life is temporary? How can I enjoy and appreciate my life and yet recognize that it is finite, that it ends? How can I appreciate something and realize that one day I'm going to have to give it back? Or maybe you'd say, I want to be grateful, but Jake, you have no idea what I'm actually going through. How can I be grateful when I'm going through this much grief or this much suffering? Or maybe you want to apply that to the world, and you could say, how can I be grateful when the world is in the state that it's in, when others are suffering at the magnitude that they are currently? How can I hold the abundance that I'm currently experiencing in my life, and yet at the same time recognize this scarcity that so many others are feeling in this world today? Fill in the blank. How can I be grateful when? It may be something entirely unique for you, but we all have these barriers. And yes, last week we talked about how gratitude, at times, it can be as simple as an on-off switch, as changing our perspective, as shifting and rearranging our focus to see all that has gone right instead of all that has gone wrong. But sometimes it's not that easy. And friends, that's a very real and a very human challenge. I also want to acknowledge that as we look to this week and we look to Thursday to celebrate Thanksgiving, that it's not a celebration or it's not a time of gratitude for everyone. And I especially want to just recognize our Indigenous brothers and sisters who experience this time of the year with more grief than gratitude. But when we look at these challenges and these barriers and these obstacles to experiencing gratitude in our life, there's something that they all have in common. Yes, they are all valid experiences of being human, but they also all have a consequence. They all have an effect. And that effect is that they cut us off from receiving. They cut us off from being open to what life is trying to give us. See, gratitude opens us up. Gratitude is like saying yes to life, to the good, to the bad, to everything. And I think life is often this rhythm between opening and closing, that there are moments in life where we feel open, we feel ready to connect, and there are times where we feel closed, we feel more protective, more in defense. More than likely, we are probably all going to experience a combination of those two things on Thursday at our Thanksgiving tables, right? Like you go into it, you're feeling open, you're so excited to see family or friends and share a meal. But then, of course, someone's going to bring up politics, right? Or someone's going to bring up that touchy family subject. And we're going to have that dance between being open and being closed. The thing about being closed emotionally, you can almost imagine it like the symbol of a closed fist, that you're gripping tightly to our expectations of how things are supposed to be, how you want things to be. And when you're closed, when you're tight like this, you're not able to receive. It only can be with an open hand that you can receive love. I think of it like, you remember that old arcade game, The Claw, where you're trying to get the prize? And you press the button and it lowers on the teddy bear, and then right before it's in your grasp, the claw closes and it goes back up. Sometimes that's what our hearts are like. There's nothing to receive when our hearts are closed. And so gratitude is that which opens our hearts. But again, you might be that person that says, what does it actually mean to be grateful? I want to be grateful, but I don't know how. Maybe you're a practical person. You're like, give me the steps to being grateful. This is a challenge that we experience with a lot of spirituality. How do we do it? How do we be something? How do we become something? So often it feels counterintuitive. We're asking ourselves, am I doing enough to actually get to this place I want to be at? And it makes me think of this interesting dynamic between thanks and gratitude. See, one of them we give, and the other one we have. You give thanks. You say, thank you. I'm giving you thanks. Gratitude is something you have. You say, I have gratitude for you. I'm holding gratitude in my heart. And in that sense, gratitude, it's personal. It's an internal experience that flows outward. And yes, words are very powerful tools when we give thanks, because words allow us to let others know how we feel. It connects us to other people. But how many of us know that words also have limitations? Every day, for most of us, it's probably at least once a day, someone says to you, how are you? And in your mind, you're thinking, well, if I had the time, I might actually tell you how I really am. But good. I'm good. Thanks for asking. How are you? Because words can't always describe in the time that we have the full weight of what we're feeling. And sometimes this is true in the positive sense too. Sometimes we have these sacred, transcendent experiences, and trying to put it into words seems like it would just limit or demean the beauty of what we experienced. The Christian mystic Meister Eckhart says this: if the only prayer you ever say in your entire life is thank you, it will be enough. If the only prayer you ever say in your entire life is thank you, it will be enough. In other words, I think what he's saying is, don't worry about having all the right words, all the right language. Don't worry about trying to express yourself perfectly all the time. You have nothing to prove. In fact, if the only experience of God or the divine or however else you'd like to name it, if the only experience you have of that is to be able to say, I'm grateful for my life, I'm grateful for this opportunity to be alive, then that's enough. I grew up in a religious context in which I didn't necessarily feel that way. I felt that my relationship with God or my spiritual life was determined by how much I did. Was I serving enough? Was I giving enough time or energy? And certainly, was I praying enough? Or was I praying long enough prayers? I was on the music team when I was growing up, and after rehearsal, we would gather together and kind of circle up and have a little prayer session. And sometimes it felt like these sessions would be a competition for who could have the longest, most wordy, intelligent prayer. And there was this one time in particular in which I was sitting back there and someone was praying. And have you ever heard yourself fall asleep? Is that a thing? I've only had this happen one time. It was this time. I actually heard myself snore, and I'd never happened to me since. It feels like a superpower that I'd like to have. But I heard it, and I realized I was falling asleep, so I shook myself awake. But I think back on this memory, and I think about those times and sometimes how it felt like if we could just say all these words and fill these prayers, then it would be enough. And I love what this quote is saying, that if the only experience that you ever have is just to look at your life in gratitude, if the only two words you ever say in a spiritual context is thank you, that is enough. But that word enough is an interesting word that came up last week, and it's important again this week, because when it comes to gratitude and the challenges to gratitude, what we're often asking is it enough? Do I have enough? And last week we named that as a mentality of scarcity. Do I have enough? And we really talked about having scarcity in the context of life. Like, do I have enough of the things I need in life? But today I want to talk about scarcity in terms of life itself. That sometimes we have a scarcity around even our sense of being here, which brings me to this next barrier to gratitude. What does it mean to be grateful and at the same time recognize that we must eventually let all things go? That the very thing that we're often so grateful for, life, is something that must be returned. You know, life is a rental. All the things in life are rentals. And yet, this interesting phenomenon that I've been noticing is that there have been some news stories about how the extremely wealthy, some of the billionaires in our society, have started to put a lot of effort, time, money, energy into trying to live forever, trying to find the technologies and the methods to live forever. And what's interesting, what I've found is that these people are spending so much more time, energy, resource on trying to prolong their life that they're not even really enjoying the life that's in front of them. And we might look at this as an overblown example, but yet I think in our own ways, we all do this, right? We all face this balance between trying to hold on to things versus just enjoying them for what they are in the moment. Like, how many of you have been to someone's house where they had a plastic covering over their furniture? If that's you, don't need to raise your hand. I don't want to shame you. Everyone is loved here. You're very much loved. I don't want to shame you, but I just want to speak on behalf of the couch for just 1 minute. This couch that's covered in plastic, you know, it's the purpose of this couch is to seat people, right? It wants to seat people. In fact, the couch, it just wants to make contact with butts, you know what I mean? And I think that sometimes by putting plastic on the couch, we're depriving this couch of its very purpose, of the very thing that it wants to do in life, you know? And yet, whether or not we have plastic on our furniture, I think in life, there are things about our lives, there are things in our lives that we leave the plastic on, right? There are things that we're so concerned about protecting and preserving and prolonging that we don't even enjoy, that we don't even fully live in or are fully present to. As a musician, I have had the opportunity at various points in my life to, you know, every now and again get a new guitar. And there's always this really awesome thing because I bring it home and I don't even really play it much. I just stare at it, you know. Maybe I put it on and like take a look at myself in the mirror and then I kind of put it back in the case. You know, I'm like, don't want to scuff it. And for the first couple of weeks, I'm overly tender and overly cautious with it. And then what tends to happen is around week 3 or maybe a month, this thing happens that I've been dreading, and is that I get my first ding or my first scratch on the guitar. And in that moment, I'm thinking, oh no, the very thing that I was trying to avoid happened. But then right after that, there's this sense of relief because I remember, oh, this thing is meant to be played. It's meant to be used. It's not meant to just be looked at. And a ding is actually a sign of life. And so from then on, usually, I'm able to enjoy it for what it is. We all have those things that sometimes it's a relief to have those moments, to have that first ding. Because otherwise, we get stuck in this fear of loss, in this scarcity. And what it does is it actually closes us off from fully enjoying life. It inhibits us from taking risks, and really it inhibits us from fully living. And this dynamic between risk and joy, this doesn't have to be some grandiose thing. I think this shows up every day in our daily lives, that we have this balance that we face, this tension between doing things from a place of fear and doing things from a place of joy, of wonder. Theologian Karl Barth said that joy is the simplest form of gratitude. Joy, the simplest form of gratitude. The image that I got when reflecting on this quote was out of this gift that we've been given. And when we live in joy, it's like we're taking the wrapping paper off the gift. We're taking the plastic off the furniture. And yet when we function out of fear, it's like we're holding on to the gift in its wrapping paper and afraid to actually open it up, afraid to actually use it. And it really brings me to this thought that maybe living well, living fully, living with some risk, getting some dings on our lives, maybe that's actually an indication that we are grateful for life. I mean, what better sign that someone is aware of the magnitude of the gift and the privilege that we have just to be alive than to see that person fully living, right? When we look at someone and we say, man, they are really living. And gratitude, as we talked about before with the previous quote, if gratitude is really the only spiritual thing we ever need to do, and if living fully and living well is a sign or a symbol of gratitude, then in that sense, living fully, living well, is the only spiritual thing we need to do. If A equals C and B equals C, then A equals C. Or B equals, I don't know. I failed that one, but you know what I mean. And yet, even this idea of living fully, we experience barriers to that are natural, that are human. This desire to be in control, this sense of attachment. And it can be hard to enjoy every moment versus getting caught up in the thoughts of how can I preserve this moment, or how can I create more moments like this? How many of you enjoyed the rain yesterday? It's so lovely to get rain here in this city, and I caught myself yesterday. I'm just enjoying the rain and the feeling and the cool and the smell. It's just wonderful, right? And then I caught myself going, you know what? Tucson will be perfect if just we had a little bit more rain, right? Just a couple more rainy days. And then I caught myself and I thought, man, you're doing it. Instead of just being in the present, instead of enjoying what you have, it's always, well, just a little more, and that would be enough. When I was in elementary school, I had this one aspiration, okay, and that aspiration was to get a girlfriend. Now, in elementary school, having a boyfriend or girlfriend was nothing more than a status symbol, okay? There was no real relationship happening, but everyone who had a girlfriend or a boyfriend was super cool and popular, and I just wanted to be that, and I was never that. And so one day, finally, on a Friday afternoon, this girl that I liked, which just meant I thought she would make a good candidate to be my status symbol, I asked her to be my girlfriend, and on a Friday afternoon, right as school ended, she said yes, and I thought, oh my gosh, finally, this thing I've been waiting for, it's finally happened. Monday is going to be the best day of my life. I'm going to be the king of this school. And so I went home on Friday afternoon, and I was so excited for this new thing I had, and yet I was so afraid of losing it that, I kid you not, that whole weekend I didn't want to leave the house. I didn't want to do anything because I was afraid, I'm serious, I was afraid that I might die, and I would die before I ever had the experience of walking into school as the man, and so my mom was like, do you want to do anything this weekend? I'm like, no, I just want to stay in my room safely, and protect what I have, right? Now, I walked into school that Monday, and unfortunately, she dumped me on Monday. So it was a very short-lived experience. But so often we try to hold on to things versus just having gratitude for what's given to us moment by moment. And to me, this illustrates this dynamic between gratitude and entitlement. Entitlement says, well, this is mine. This is mine now, okay? Like when you give a child a present and immediately within 10 seconds, they're like, no one touches. This is mine. And yet gratitude says, nothing is mine. It's all a gift. It's all being given to me, and I recognize that. And for me, growing up within the Christian tradition and the expression of Christianity that I grew up in, there was this interesting dynamic and this interesting focus on salvation. And what I found, especially reflecting back, is that salvation and this, inherent kind of focus on salvation was really a desire for certainty, a desire for guarantees around life and being able to prolong and hold on to life. But what's fascinating is that the shadow side of this created a lot of fear and a lot of separation and a lot of concern and wondering, do I even have this thing that I want so bad? Now, we make light of it, but this was a very real experience for a lot of us, and a deep fear, some deep anxiety, which brings me to this really freeing and wonderful quote by Carl Jung. He says, if our religion is based on salvation, our chief emotions will be fear and trembling. If our religion is based on wonder, our chief emotion will be gratitude. And friends, that wonder of life, it includes the full picture. It includes death. It includes the acknowledgement that life is this beautiful temporary gift. See, gratitude is not a denial of reality. It's an acceptance of the full picture. It's an acceptance of the love, the loss, the pain, the grief, the doubt, the betrayal, the confusion, the joy, all of it. And it's looking at all of it with a clear lens and still saying, yes, thank you for that gift. How many of us have a favorite Thanksgiving food? No one? Oh, I was like, for a second, I was like, so you just you're neutral about it all? Okay. How many of you hate Thanksgiving food? Oh, they don't want to name yourself. Okay, I get that. Well, my favorite Thanksgiving food is the turkey leg, okay? And the reason that I hear some disappointment, that's okay, I can move past that. The reason I love the turkey leg, I'm realizing, is because the turkey leg is something that is scarce. It's something that I only get twice a year, once at Thanksgiving and once at the county fair, okay? And those are two very different turkey legs, but nonetheless, they're precious to me. Now, I don't eat turkey legs around people very often, and if I have eaten a turkey leg around you, it's a very intimate thing. I don't show a lot of people what happens when I eat a turkey leg because it's a very I turn into something else. I turn into an animal, okay? And I just, I have to admit that. But I realize that I appreciate it because it's scarce, because it's something that I don't get all the time. And I think the same is true of all these Thanksgiving foods that we like. Like, imagine if you had stuffing every day, you would not be excited about stuffing come Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving food only occurs once a year unless you've been to this restaurant from my childhood called Boston Market. Okay, I don't know if you know about Boston Market. It's a place that you can get Thanksgiving food all year long. Now, Boston Market was one of those places for me when I revisited it as an adult, and I'm sorry, it just didn't hold up. It was like, that childhood memory, it's pristine, and then you revisit it as an adult, and you kind of have to see the reality of it. And I don't want to talk about it any further because it's it's still a wound. But anyway, life is precious because it ends, because it's temporary. We aren't grateful for things in life that aren't precious. Like, how many of you are always trying to get yourself to drink more water, and you have like that gallon of water at your desk and you're like, come on, and you can't do it. But then when you have those moments where you run out of water and you want more, you've never tasted anything better because it's precious. The word precious comes from the Latin root word pretium, which is also where we get the word appreciate. Friends, we don't appreciate things unless they are precious. And what if the full scope of appreciating life comes from the preciousness of life? You might be someone where you're saying, how can I be grateful and yet be dealing with so much loss and grief in my life? A little bit of gratitude isn't going to change the situation I am in. A little bit of gratitude isn't going to bring someone back. A little bit of gratitude isn't going to heal all of this grief. It's not going to change how I feel. I want to share a quote that I think is a very profound meditation on grief But before I do, I just do have to give a disclaimer. It is from a Marvel movie. If you didn't want any quotes from Marvel, you shouldn't have hired a 30-year-old pastor. That's your problem. But this quote actually comes from this beautiful conversation between two characters, and the character who delivers this quote has already passed away, and he's delivering it to his beloved, and she's basically wondering, how can I go on? And he's communicating to her as this sort of vision. His name is also Vision, so don't get confused. And he's basically saying, this is what it means to go on in grief. And he says, what is grief if not love persevering? What is grief if not love persevering? You didn't think Marvel could get you like that, but it did. See, grief is an absence. Maybe it's an absence of a person. Maybe at times it's an absence of hope. And yet that absence implies a presence. Like the shadow to the light. If there is a recognition that you're experiencing pain of a loss, you are also recognizing a deep place of love that exists within you. That grief is just gratitude in another form. Friends, I'm not saying, oh, are you grieving? Well, just be grateful and it's all going to make it better. No, far from it. What I'm saying is, and I'm asking, what if your grief is actually just another aspect of the gratitude you had for that person, for that thing? And so in that sense, you don't need to change the way that you grieve. You don't need to improve upon it in any way, but maybe what if you just embraced your grief, you embraced your natural process and recognized it as another form, another expression of that gratitude. And as we think about reframing grief, it doesn't just have to apply to people. It can also apply to experiences. Maybe there are seasons of life that you look back on and there's some grief there because you know that you're not going to get to repeat that time in your life again. And there's a sense of loss. But you can also flip it and realize that sense of loss is also a sense of deep appreciation for what I had, for what I was given. Maybe you look back at life and you think about a thing that you used to be able to do that you can no longer do, or it's something that's not a part of your life that you used to really love. And if you flip that grief, you can see that its other face is gratitude. See, there's this common expression, it's better to have loved and lost than to not have loved at all, right? And in the same sense, it's better to have been given a wonderful, beautiful gift and to have to, at some point, give it back, as we all do, than to have never been given it at all. And I think that, friends, this is an affirmation of life. It's a way for us to say yes to the deal, to the mystery, to the unknowing of life, and still say thank you. And lastly, you might look at our world and the pain and the suffering of our world, and you might say, how can I be grateful at a time like this? How can I have gratitude when there's so much suffering and pain? How can I not only hold my own pain, but the world's pain? See, there's this interesting thing that happens often in the spiritual sphere in which we tend to kind of spiritually bypass and kind of try to avoid pain and try to just skip over it. How many of you have heard a phrase like good vibes only, right? Just good vibes. That's all I want, or high frequency only. But yet this type of rhetoric is directly challenged when we see real suffering in the world. The situation in Gaza right now has forced people to really confront this idea. Is it just good vibes only, or does our spirituality need to include and have a space for and be able to hold the full weight of the pain and the suffering in our world? How can we hold our own abundance and at the same time hold the very real scarcity that exists in the world today? Because the world is not purely one or the other. The world is not all light and love all the time. And yet, it is not also just survival of the fittest. We have to see and recognize the whole picture. And true gratitude for life, for this opportunity to be here, it doesn't minimize the real suffering that's going on in the world. But at the same time, friends, I believe that it gives us vision for what's possible in life. And in this sense, gratitude can be a call to action. See, I don't think that we are horrified at what's going on in Gaza or Yemen or the Ukraine or the very real difficulties and atrocities that are happening in our own country. I don't think we are horrified at these things because we're saying, well, that's just how things are. No, I think we're horrified at them because we know that they do not have to be that way. And that is where the outrage comes from. And so in this sense, gratitude is a re-envisioning of what's possible. Just as grief is gratitude in a different form, maybe the grief that we experience at the state of the world is also a glimpse at what could be, that we wouldn't have that grief if we didn't have a vision for what was possible and a glimpse into what could be. And I think Jesus is a fantastic example of someone demonstrating what could be in the world. Often there is this interpretation of Jesus' life and Jesus' death that sort of looks at following in the way of Jesus and basically says, in order to fall in the way of Jesus, I must emulate him in his suffering, in his martyrdom, in his sacrifice. But I wonder if what Jesus was saying, even in the act of his death, wasn't that this is how it has to be, but he was saying this isn't how it has to be. That his death was saying there's a new way of being in the world. And yes, I may need to suffer as a victim of the most powerful military force that has ever existed in order to demonstrate that. But he was giving vision for a world that is possible. And what if we could lean into that? See, next week, we're going to have this opportunity to eat, to pray, which is really just another word for having reflections on gratitude, and to love. And that love is a verb. It's a form of doing. It's an action. Because I think gratitude asks us, are you just going to look at the abundance in your life and try to hold on to it? Or are you going to give it away? Because gratitude expands our heart. And it makes room for others in our heart. Maybe those others are on the other side of our city, or they're on the other side of the world. So this Thursday, as you sit at your Thanksgiving table, or at least for most of us who in some form are going to gather with family or friends, first let's acknowledge that it's not going to be easy for everyone, that for some there's grief, there's struggle, there's difficulty around family. Maybe there are people that you're going to see that you know you don't fully get along with. Maybe your heart's heavy at things going on in your life, or your heart's heavy at the state of the world. And again, we want to acknowledge our Indigenous brothers and sisters who would have their heart heavy for really what this time of year brings to mind. But as we think of gratitude in the light of all of these things, let us not think of something that is clean, that is manicured, that just glosses over the difficulty and the pain. May we see gratitude as something that is edgy, is earthy, is dirty, because it looks at life as honestly and fully as possible. And in the midst of the reality of everything that is, it can still say, thank you. Yes, thank you. I affirm this gift of life. So Aldea, if the only prayer that we ever pray is thank you, let it be enough. And may we recognize that thank you doesn't even need to come in the form of words, but just in a life well lived. And may we recognize that life is precious, not in spite of, but because of its impermanence. May the abundance that we experience in our own lives be a call to action as we address the very real scarcities in our world. And lastly, friends, may you experience deep joy and gratitude this week as you share a table with the ones you love. Thank you.